Welcome to Season 5 of She Ventures. I am your host, Doria Lavanino. She Ventures is a podcast about women and their work and life pivots. I believe in the power of storytelling. I also believe that if you change one woman's life, you start to change a family or a community. Our mission is to elevate the diverse stories of everyday women in their worth. One promise, no mansplaining ever. Sit back, listen, and hit subscribe. We'd love to hear from you. You can find us at sheventurespodcast.com. At first glance, today's guest epitomizes career stability. After all, she worked as a federal employee for more than 30 years. Yet, as with every woman on She Ventures, her ordinary is extraordinary. She's an Army veteran who later worked at the United States Post Office, the Internal Revenue Service, and before we had a thing called side hustles, she was doing her own side hustle because she was building a business, a development consulting firm called Encore Empowerment International, where she is CEO, and she is a executive coach, and she's also skilled at leadership management, motivational speaking, and conflict resolution, all things that she learned in her federal job as well. Additional accomplishments and pivots. She does have a few. Raising 2 children, now adults, 2 marriages, and 2 divorces. Authored or co-authored 4 books, earned several degrees, including a Ph.D., why not, in business administration and management, and she also became an ordained minister. She also survived a heart attack in 2021. Another pivotal moment where, guided by her deep faith, she decided it was time to shift gears to full-time entrepreneurship. Here to tell us her story is Dr. Debra Owens. Debra, welcome to She Ventures.
Thank you so much, Doria, for having me. Just thank you. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this opportunity to share my story on this platform because we all have a story, and I haven't told my story, I guess, to this extent that I am about to. So I'm just grateful for the opportunity to do that because I believe that when we share our stories, we inspire each other. We motivate each other and empower each other. So thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And that is so true. And that's the reason why She Ventures exists. I feel like women have had their stories told for them for so long by others. And I love that we're telling our own stories. So I wondered if you could start by telling listeners a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and if it comes to you, one event or person that immediately comes to mind when you think about your childhood.
Well, I grew up in rural Mississippi, the Delta, they call it. As far as I can remember back, being a child, I remember happy times, just happy times. When you don't know, you don't know. So now that I'm older, of course, and I look back, I realize that growing up, there were hard times, but I didn't realize that as a child because it was all I knew. And when I think about, in response to your question about who comes to mind first, of course, we automatically, or we generally say our mom or our father, but my grandfather comes to mind because he was just this great man. He was a disciplinarian, first and foremost. I remember that. Outside of being a disciplinarian, he was this individual, this human, my grandfather, who I looked at as one that could do anything. He didn't have an education. He couldn't write per se, and he couldn't read, but he could build anything. He farmed. And I just remember spending a lot of time with my grandfather from the time, I guess, of infancy to about 4 or 5 years old that I actually lived with my grandfather. Even when I started to live with my mom, I would spend every weekend at my grandfather's until I graduated from high school at the age of 17. I just remember him being this person that could do anything, sort of my superhero per se. But he was a disciplinarian. I just remember fun times being at my grandfather's home. I was the first grandchild. I have six aunts, four uncles. So it's kind of a big family. And I just remember really fun times. I remember going fishing with my grandfather. I remember he would till the garden, the crops and stuff like that. And I remember planting seeds and things of that nature. I even remember he used to go hunting and kill deer. And he would come back with the deer, and he'd process the deer, and we grind up the deer sausage, stuff like that. I remember. So basically, truthfully, he taught me survival skills. You see the reality shows today on TV, Survivor and people, on these journeys or whatever out in the wilderness. My grandfather actually lived that in a sense, more structured, of course, but he actually lived that. And that's what I remember about him. And that's why he just stands out to me so much. And let me tell you something that's really profound about my grandfather. Six girls, four boys. My biological grandmother, I never knew because she passed away 2 weeks after my youngest aunt was born. So I never got to meet my biological grandma.
She died in childbirth?
2 weeks after childbirth.
Oh, okay. Okay.
2 weeks after childbirth. So my grandfather, here he is left with six girls and four boys. My grandmother's biological brothers and sisters, they all, kind of wanted to chip in and help my grandfather, and they wanted him to actually allow them to raise some of the siblings. But my grandfather refused to split his children up at the request of my grandmom, who had passed away. They said, of course, I wasn't fair to know, but I was told that on her dying bed, she asked my grandfather to not split her children up. So my grandfather basically single handedly raised six girls and four boys.
10 children.
Yes, yes. And they all turn out to be productive citizens, with morals and values, just good people, not perfect, but good people. And I'm so proud of my grandfather for that.
That's an incredible story. And what resonates with me, you spoke about how he didn't have what we consider an education today in terms of reading and writing, but he knew how to survive with farming, hunting, all of those skills that if you took someone like me, a New Yorker, and you put me in the wilderness, I mean, I hope I would find a way to survive, but honestly, I don't know if I would, right? And there's so much to be said for that.
Right. It really is. And he just had a good reputation. His reputation preceded him. I remember being a child, one of my fondest memories, I guess. Maybe not the fondest, but just a memory in general. I remember going to the bank in our little town with my grandfather, and he couldn't write, as I said, but he would sign his name with an X. He would sign his name with an X, but he had such a great reputation that the people in the bank knew him and they would extend, credit to him for this or for that. And he was just a good person in spite of being that disciplinarian. But overall, he was a good person.
I didn't plan to go here, but I'm thinking to your grandfather's time, and I'm sure that he didn't really have a chance to be exposed to a traditional education. He was likely surviving.
Right. He didn't have that opportunity. I don't know much about his childhood, but I do know that when he and my biological grandmom were married, they started to have children and they started to have a lot of children. And then when she passed away, as you said, he was in survival mode and in that mode of raising all of those children and just making sure that they had what they needed.
That's incredible. We always think about that in terms of women, and it's just refreshing to hear about a man who did that and did it obviously so well. I also wanted to ask you, and I always appreciate anyone who served our country, and I want to thank you for your service. I know that you were in the Army. You were actively enlisted for 3 years, I believe. sorry, 5 years, and then you were in the reserves for 3. And so I assume that after you graduated from high school, that was when you chose to enlist. Is that right?
Well, actually, I enlisted under what they call the delayed entry program. The military has this thing where they send the recruiters to the schools to recruit soldiers. They came to our school. They were doing the little recruiting thing. So I thought it was a good idea. I signed up under the delayed entry program. I, along with one of my classmates, we joined under what they call the buddy system. And that means that you would remain buddies and you would go together wherever you were stationed at. But actually, because I was underage, my mother had to sign for me to join. I was around 16 when I signed up under the delayed entry program. But I thought it was a good thing to do because I'm from a small rural place and I'd heard all of these stories about life outside of where I was from. And I wanted to have that opportunity to be exposed to a different life. And I hadn't prepared for college, even though I was an honor student, graduated honors. I just hadn't prepared, hadn't submitted any applications or anything like that. And I just wanted to go in a different direction at that time. That's how I signed up under the delayed entry program. And I graduated from high school on May 30th, 1986. I'm telling my age here.
Not much different than mine.
Yeah, and June 4th, I was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, as a new recruit in the Army now. The initial experience was excitement, but then it set in that I couldn't go home when I wanted to. So I went through this little phase of being homesick and really regretting at that point that I had signed up because I didn't think about that before I signed up that, okay, you're not going to be able to leave when you want to. And that was my first time away from home from my mom. And my mom and I, we had a really, really close relationship. My mom passed away in 2011, but we had a really close relationship. I grew up actually living a sheltered life. When I was there at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, they have what you call guard duty or something to that effect. It's been a while, so I can't really remember what they call it. You have to stand guard at the door, and make sure the doors are locked and nobody comes in and things of that nature. But I would see this bus bringing new recruits in. The bus is coming in and out. And it dawned on me in that moment, on that one particular night, that I couldn't leave. So I started to get really, really homesick and sad. And I remember calling my mom when we would have the opportunity to use the telephone, crying to my mom and telling her I didn't want to be there anymore. And I asked her if she could come to pick me up. So she thought she could come and pick me up. And she was actually preparing to come to Fort Jackson, to go to Fort Jackson, South Carolina to pick me up. And she called the recruiter who had signed me up and was asking him some questions. And he explained to her that she just couldn't go and pick me up, that I belonged to Uncle Sam now at that time, and I could not
Wow.
leave. So I had to stay there at the MEPS station, they call it, for probably about 3 weeks because I didn't know how to do a push up. You do this little initial
Yeah, that's hard.
right. I knew how to get down, but had no idea how to get back up. And that's another story. But anyway, I was there for 3 weeks. And for those 3 weeks, all we did, drills and PT and things of that nature, learning the basics of being a soldier.
Total culture shock.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. But I needed it. I needed that because I had grown up being sheltered. So I really needed that. But after I finally passed that initial PT test and went on to basic training, the training was so intense that I was too tired to even be homesick. I was too
Yeah.
tired to be homesick because the training was really intense. And there used to be a commercial that said, we do more before 5 a.m. than most people do all day. That commercial was so true. I realized that it was actually true because I remember being up like 4 o'clock in the morning, the drill sergeants coming in And I was assigned to this area of Fort Jackson they call Tank Hill. I don't even know if it still exists. I remember the drill sergeants coming in and waking us up, get up, soldiers, get up. We'd get up and we'd be out running PT like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning through the woods in the dark with a flashlight. It was really intense, but I'm so grateful for my time in the military because I needed that to become independent, to develop my mindset to independency and responsibility. Not that I wasn't responsible, but I needed that to interact with the world, other people besides those who I had grown up around and grown up with. So I did spend 5 years active duty in the military. The plan after I got into the training and all of that and everything became like the new norm for me, I was really progressing really quick. I remember being soldier of the quarter on the post in training, things of that nature. And I was progressing really, really fast. My first duty assignment was Germany, Stuttgart, Germany. Here I am, 18 years old, and they shipped me off to Germany right out of training. Of course, that was a culture shock. I'd never been outside of the United
Right.
States. Yeah.
Of
And
course.
here I find myself, making this 8, 10 hour flight, across the ocean to Germany. And I remember getting off the plane and seeing these guards with carrying rifles, and all of this stuff was just a shock to me. But here again, I adapted because that was my new life. I adapted, and of course, I always missed home, but I grew fond of the military, and my intent was to do 20 years at least to retire from the military. But I think around 1990, 91 is when the Desert Storm started. I believe that's when that war campaign started, around 1990 or 91. And at this time, I was stationed at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio, Texas. I was processed to go to the war zone, and I was on call, standby, took all the shots, had to do will, power of attorney, and all of these things. But long story short, I did not have to go. And during that time, what they call your expiration term of service, your ETS date, my ETS date came around. So I did not reenlist. I just got out at that point. Because by that point, too, or in between this time, I got married for the first time.
Was he a soldier?
Yes, I met my first husband at Fort Sam Houston, Texas. I didn't want us to be split up either, so that was another reason why I did not re-enlist. So I just got out there at Fort Sam Houston. He stayed in for several more years, and he ended up going to Germany. So I ended up back in Germany for a second time.
This time as a spouse.
Right, this time as a spouse. I had my first child in Germany. Yeah.
Oh, wow. What was it like to be a woman in the military at that time?
Well, you know what, Astoria? I'm going to tell you, when I first arrived at the base there in Germany, the base that I was assigned to, Nelligan Barracks, they called it, I would say I had a bit of a shock because the barracks were co ed, the men and women in the same barracks. And that was a first for me because in training, of course, that was not the case. So when I'm there and I'm settled into my room and I go to the restroom and I'm in the stall and I hear someone clear their voice, like clear their throat. And I'm thinking in my mind, well, that sounds like a guy. And it turned out it was. It was a guy. So that was kind of like a shock to me that the barracks were co ed, and they were co ed. They really were. I never had any encounters that really just, I guess, stood out to me that I would say women per se were treated different in the military because my experience was just a good experience overall. And that was in the mid to late 80s because it was 86, 87, 88 during my first tour of Germany.
I'm feeling a bit ignorant because I remember the Berlin Wall coming down, but you served after that, right?
I think it was before that because
Was it?
a little before or maybe right after. Because I remember being in Czechoslovakia on a tour, and it was something about the wall. I'm thinking it was either right before the wall came down or right after the wall came down.
Because Reagan was president from 80 to 88, right?
Hmm.
Oh, so right. So you would have been in Germany. I don't remember exactly when the wall fell down. Oops.
Yeah, me either. But I do remember that coming up, in conversations and discussions, the wall when I was there. But I was there the first time from 86 to 88.
So you met your first husband, you had a child, you were back in Germany in a different capacity. And post military, I guess life kind of also decided for you, decided to go to Germany and have a child and start a family. And then how did you end up back in the US? You started your federal career, obviously, as a soldier, but then your next job.
My husband, my first husband, and I, as I said, he stayed in for several years. But when he decided to get out, we came back to Georgia, Columbus, Georgia, really, that base, Fort Benning in Columbus, Georgia. And that's where my ex husband got out of the military at. And he is from Georgia, born and raised. So we ended up here in Georgia. And of course, one of the trending careers at that time was the post office. We both took the test at the same time, and he got hired first. And when they hired him, and I saw that he was making, pretty decent money at the Postal Service, because at the time I was doing different jobs through staffing agencies and things of that nature. When he was hired by the Postal Service, I was working for the state of Georgia. I was working for the state of Georgia, the medical board, where the doctors are submit their paperwork to get their license. So that's why I was working for the state of Georgia medical board.
You were always attracted to government jobs, right? What was it that interested you or attracted you to them?
I think it went along with the culture of being a veteran because the federal government jobs are mainly a great part, anyways, are veterans. So you hear other veterans talk about the federal jobs, and that's the way to go. And they are more secure, better benefits, and things of that nature. The wages or salaries are fairly decent. So that's how I ended up, staying in that lane per se because of interacting with other veterans and just hearing them talk about federal employment, federal careers. And I chose that route as well. When my ex husband was hired by the Postal Service, I saw, that he was doing good, as far as pay. So I said, well, I'm going to see if I can get in with the Postal Service too. I reached out to the HR department and basically expressed my interest. And it just turns out that they were hiring at the time. So a year later, I was hired by the Postal Service. So we both ended up working for the Postal Service, and I worked for the Postal Service for 11 years total. I did 4 years as a bargaining unit employee. I started in 95, so from 95 to 99, I was a bargaining unit employee processing mail. While I was a flat sorting machine operator where you just sort the flats. I went into management after the 4 years. I went into management and served in a management capacity, different roles for the remainder of the 7 years that I was with the Postal Service. I guess at some point, the shift work, because I worked different shifts over that 11-year period, the day shift, the evening shift, and the overnight shift. Just over time, the shift work got the best of me. And I wanted to just go in a different direction. I want to have a job like normal people where I work Monday through Fridays with weekends and holidays off. And then, two, over the course of those 11 years, of course, I got divorced from my first husband, then got married again to my second husband, who also works for the Postal Service.
Were you all together at the same, working in the same place?
No, no, never that. Well, not never that, but it just took a toll on me. And then by this time, the second marriage, I had my son. So now I have two children, and the shift work is just overbearing with two
Oh, that would be a
children.
lot.
It was a lot. And even to this day, there's some regret there that I worked. Even though I'm grateful, there's also some regret because there are times, periods of time that I don't even remember really because I was working so many hours and away from my children and having to leave them with babysitters when I was working overnight and things of that nature. So I missed a lot of their time growing up because I had to work. And at the time, the Postal Service, the hours were long. I was working 6 days a week, 10 and 12 hours a day. It was a lot and it just took a toll on me. And I got to a point in 2000, maybe around the latter part of 2005. I said, okay, I can't do this anymore. So I'm going to have to go in a different direction here. But I still wanted to stay in that federal employee capacity. So I started just to look for other jobs, a career change per se. And that's how I ended up working with the IRS.
And it was in a human resources capacity, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Right. Yeah. I ended up getting a job in HR as a labor and employee relations specialist. But I will tell you, it was a detail assignment with the Postal Service that prepared me to even apply for the job that I ended up with the IRS because I worked maybe like a year and a half or two on a temporary basis as a LR specialist for the Postal Service.
Were you during that time also pursuing your education, I believe, also, right? In addition to working and raising children.
Yes, yes. I'm so glad you brought that up because it seems I've always had a lot of irons in the fire. I was working for the Postal Service. I remember working for the Postal Service and actually physically going to school to a classroom setting, sometimes 3 days out of the week. They were not into the virtual classroom at that time. But one of the reasons why I was so driven to do that is because I wanted change for my children. I wanted a regular job. I wanted a Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And I figured, or I just concluded that in order for me to get this, I'm going to have to get a couple of degrees under my belt and better position myself, make myself more competitive so I can have this. So that's why I did it. And my mindset was go ahead and get this pain over with. Just do it and get this under your belt and then apply for a regular job.
For the 11 years that you were in the Postal Service, you got your bachelor's degree. Did you also get your master's degree, or did that also happen during that time?
That happened during that time, during that 11-year period. I finished my bachelor's and my master's.
What made you say I'm going to get a PhD?
Oh, now that's a you're gonna laugh when you hear this. Now, I would say that I came up with this grand idea that I want to get a PhD, right? I'm going to pursue this PhD. So I started a program. I'm going to say it had to have been in 2006, 2007. And by this time, though, I was working with the IRS, but I'd already gotten, an upgrade in my career. I'm doing good. The ideal job for me. I started this PhD program, and the first course, the first assignment, we had to answer like four questions. They tell you like 500 to 700 words or 500 to 1,000 words, whatever it was at that time. I was working on the homework. I remember it so clearly, writing out my response to these questions. And I said, you know what? I don't feel like doing homework and I don't want to do this right now. So I politely typed an email to my academic advisor and said, I am withdrawing from the program effective immediately. So that was my first attempt at the PhD. It was not the right time at all. Fast forward to 2009, my girlfriend, the same girlfriend who I joined the military with, her name is Debra also. She contacts me one day and she says, well, Debra, let's go back to school and get our PhD. And I was like, I don't know. I've tried that before and it just wasn't the right time and I wasn't feeling it. And she talked me into it, long story short. She talked me into it. And we started the program together because we figured we keep each other encouraged and motivated, help each other out.
Did that work?
It did to a certain point. We started the program, and this time, though, I wasn't in a rush because I already had a job that I was happy with. The work and life balance was great when I worked for the IRS. I wasn't managing or people one on one anymore. I was basically managing the program that I was assigned and reporting to a manager who was in DC and I'm here in Atlanta. So it was like the ideal position for me. So I wasn't in a rush to finish the degree. So I was only taking maybe one or two classes a semester.
You got it done.
Oh, right. Yeah, it took me 7 years, but I got it done. Unfortunately, my girlfriend didn't finish. She put a lot of time into the program, but the PhD program is a tasking program. It really is. And especially when you get to the actual research study itself, it will weigh thin on your patience and a whole lot of other things. And that's what happened in her case. And she did not finish, and they basically terminated her from the program. Well, I was determined that I'm not going to be terminated from something I've invested a lot of time into.
Yeah. You got a PhD and more than 30 years as a federal employee. And what I wondered is, as someone who hasn't worked for the government, there are a lot of, I think, misconceptions. Is there one myth or misconception that you want to dispel about working for the federal government?
Yes, there is. And I'm so glad you asked that question because most people think that federal government employees don't work. That is the farthest from the truth. The federal government is so organized. They are so organized. There are rules, regulations, policies, and procedures for everything in the federal government. Everything. And there's a checks and balance system for everything. The federal government is one of the, well, I may sound biased because all of my career, up until 2021, of course, was federal government. But hey, that's what I know. And I know from my firsthand experience that they are so organized. They really are organized, and federal employees work. We work. We work.
Yeah. And I do know, though, that there is that perception, you're right, among some that it's like, oh, it's like a slacker job. And I don't understand that at all.
It's really not a slacker job. I will say that maybe that label or misconception or whatever comes from the fact that the federal government is mostly unionized. The union represents the bargaining unit employee, anyways, and there's a procedure or a process to go through to actually fire a federal employee, but federal employees do get fired. I worked in HR and I know they get fired because I was a part of that process, in advising management on how to fire employees if we have the documentation to support it. Not that it's a good thing, but there's that process. And we have a performance management system, where the employees, every federal employee's performance is managed, it's observed, evaluated, and managed. To me, that was one of the biggest myths that I've heard about federal government employees and employment, that they don't work. That's not true. There's a paper trail for everything, everything.
As some of our presidents have found out, unfortunately, there is a paper trail. No, I'm kidding. Um, so you've worked 30 years as a federal employee, but you were doing your education, and then after a few years at the IRS, you also started your what I call side hustle, but you started a consultancy. So how did that all come about?
As far back as I can remember, it would have to have, I guess the aha moment came for me probably in 1997, 98, really, is when I started to realize that I've always been passionate, or I was passionate about being an entrepreneur and having these entrepreneur visions and things of that nature, helping people, wanting to help others reach their purpose or pursue their purpose or maximize their potential, inspiring and empowering others. So from 1997 to 2009, I've been like researching and doing little things, not necessarily per se formalizing anything, but just kind of looking into things of that nature, entrepreneur endeavors on the side. And in 2009 is when I would say I made a conscious decision that, okay, this is part of my purpose. So I have to really formalize this now, make this vision come to pass. I got to start somewhere. It's enough of writing things down in a notepad or in a journal. I really need to take action on the vision that I have and the things that I'm passionate about. While working for the IRS, I formalized my business. I initially started out under the name of the Innovative Advisory Group, really more geared towards mediation and arbitration because I've done a lot of mediation type work, arbitration work, grievances, and things of that nature just from my federal career. So that's how I initially started under that name. And over time, it evolved into more of the coaching and empowerment and consulting. Once I started the Ph.D. program, my PhD is in business administration with a concentration in management. And over the course of my 32-year federal career, I would say 28 to 29 of those years were in some form of management leadership capacity. I've always been in a management or leadership role. It just turns out. So I kind of concluded that, okay, I'm a
Yeah,
leader. Like I'm
absolutely.
a leader because even when I wasn't necessarily looking to have those roles, it's like I was always picked out. You do this, you're a leader. And I'm like, oh, okay. I don't really want to be out front, but hey, that's what the others saw in me as well. So I kind of accepted it and just started to go with it, flow with it. Yeah, in 2009 is when I formed my business as a legal entity. Now, I didn't necessarily work it full time while I was a federal employee, especially with the IRS, because they are nosy.
Yeah. Well,
They are so very
and you
nosy.
have two kids. I mean, you're going to school. Like, my goodness, you had a lot.
And I couldn't. Like you said, I really didn't have the time. And then, too, as a federal employee, you're supposed to get permission when you conduct any outside employment activity, they call it. And being an IRS employee, they conduct soft audits on your taxes every year. So they're going to keep track of what you're doing, anyways. And I didn't want any
Of
conflicts or
interest.
any
Yeah.
problems on the job. I'm proud to say that I worked 32 years from the federal government and never once was I written up for anything. I believe in adhering to the rules.
So you formed it and you did research. You may have even done some work, but you really didn't. We'll get to, I guess, to where you got to, which was in 2021. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. You were working for the federal government, and if you could share with listeners what happened to you.
In 2021, we're all working from home now because COVID-19 surfaced in around March 2020. So we're at home, we're working full time telework, mandatory telework, all federal agencies. April 2021, it was just a regular Friday. I'm working from home because I had been since 2020. I was had closed out the day on that Friday and decided, well, I'm going to go to get me a cup of strawberry lemonade from Wendy's because I was into that drink at that time. I reached over my bed to get my debit card that was lying on the bed. And when I stood up, I had a sharp pain in the center of my chest. And immediately I recognized it as a pain that I had not had before, that I had not felt before. I'm standing and the pain is in the middle of my chest, and I'm like, oh, this is different. I haven't felt this type of pain before. I've had, what they call indigestion and things of that nature, but I knew it was different. So my son, who is a young adult and lives with me, I called my son to my room, and when he came to my room, By the time he came to my room, which wasn't that far apart, the pain was intensifying. So I knew it was serious. At this point, I asked my son to get my medicine for me because I was already taking medicine for what the doctor had diagnosed as AFib. And that's when you have a rapid heart rate or irregular heart rate.
Did you have high blood pressure as well, or no?
Well, I would say not so much, but the rapid heart rate did elevate my pressure. When my son got my medicine, I took my medicine, and by this time, the pain has gone, it's extended to my back. And I really knew what was happening then. I didn't panic per se, but I knew what was happening. And I am an ordained minister. As I said, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. So my faith kicked in at this point, and I'm praying to God, like help me. This is Deborah. I told my son to call my pastors and 911. So he has my pastors on one line and the 911 operator on the other line, and he's giving the 911 operators the directions to the house, and I'm on the line with my pastors, and we're praying because we are faith walkers. We believe, that if you call upon the name of the Lord, that He hears and He will help you in your time of trouble. I'm sweating profusely and the pain is intensifying, but I never lost consciousness and I never lost my humor. I'm still finding and managing to say humorous things even in the midst of this emergency. But I'm grateful for that because I think that if I had panicked, it could have been worse because I was already having rapid heart rates and things of that nature. When the paramedics get there, I'm explaining to them what's happening. So they hook me up to the EKG, and the EKG comes back normal. They said, well, everything's showing normal. Do you want to go to the emergency room? And I said, yeah, take me to the emergency room. And I only live maybe 3 miles from the hospital. Once in the emergency room, they hooked me up to the EKG again. So the second one showed, I guess, some concerns for the emergency room doctor. So she ordered a CAT scan. And after the CAT scan results get back, they have the on-call cardiologist to look at the CAT scan. And the next thing I know, they're like, okay, we got to get you up to the cath lab, like stat, right away. And I'm like, well, what's happening? And they said, well, ma'am, this is the funny part. You're going to think this is funny. I'm in the emergency room and my daughter is at the hospital by this time. And I'm telling her, I'm telling my daughter, can you rub some lotion on my legs? I don't want them to see me ashy. I'm still finding humor and I'm joking. And they're telling me, well, ma'am, you don't need to be concerned about lotion because you're having a heart attack. And I'm like, what? Even though I knew that's what it was. I'm like, really? And they're like, yeah. So we got to get you up to the cath lab and prep you for this procedure. So that's what they did. They took me up to the cath lab and they prepped me. And the next thing I know, they're, giving me the anesthesia and they performed this angioplasty. That's what it was. And it turned out I had a small blood clot that had formed, they said, from plaque, some plaque that had dislodged from this very small artery that they said was an extra artery that I have and don't even need. But the plaque dislodged from the lottery, from the artery, and set up a small blood clot, and the blood couldn't flow through. So the angioplasty, they put the balloon through your artery to open it up. They got everything flowing, and there was no long-term damage because they were able to go in and perform the procedure rather quickly. All of this happened so quick. It happened so quick.
Wow. I was going to say, I mean, that in and of itself is incredible because, right, your life probably is like going in front of your eyes at the same time that you're trying to maintain humor and being calm, and your faith is keeping you grounded. But it's a serious situation. Thank goodness you had family there and you were able to. And also interesting to me, though, that the paramedics were like, well, there's nothing wrong with your EKG, and that you had the foresight to say, no, there's definitely something not right here.
Right, because they said that the EKG was fine. And I was like, no, I want to go ahead and go to the emergency room. Just go ahead and take me to the emergency room. And I'm so grateful too that I had that foresight to tell them, no, take me to the emergency room because I knew that I never had that pain before, especially in my back, because I don't have back pain. I don't even have back pain. So, and it was at the center, like straight through. So I knew it was something different. And I'm just so grateful to God that I was able to not panic because I think that would have made it worse. But it's like a calmness, even though it was an emergency and I was fully aware that something was happening that was different and that it was an emergency situation. I didn't panic. It's like a calmness came over me. And the humor, maybe the humor was a form of panic and I didn't realize it. Even though I'm humorous in general, I think maybe it was that humor was intensified and it was actually some anxiety expressed in
In a
humor.
different
Maybe that's
Yeah.
right, in a different way. Maybe that's what it was. It's almost like, I don't know if you've heard, and I know for me, I guess one of the ways that I protect myself in a panicking situation is to sort of like stop. You stop, you are aware that something is happening, but you have to like shield your mind so you don't go into this big panic mode and lose it really. And I think that's what happened on that day.
I can't help but think also just of what you shared about your grandfather and about your training in the Army. Like, I would imagine it all kicks in a life or death situation, right?
Yeah, most certainly. Most certainly. Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that does make me think about times when my grandfather, may have encountered a situation that would really cause someone to panic and he remained calm and just thinking back on his strength, and his calmness. Then, of course, the military, as you said, even though I didn't go to the war zone, I was trained, on how to react or how to conduct myself or behave in that type of situation. So I'm glad that I was able to remain calm. But yeah, they were able to go in and do that procedure in record time, really. As a matter of fact, I remember afterwards talking with that cardiologist, and I still see him today. He became my second cardiologist because I was already seeing one for the diagnosis of the AFib. But I remember telling him how the procedure, how they conducted themselves in prepping me for that procedure and conducting that procedure reminded me of the military because they were so in sync. Everything was like just so structured in that whole process. And he explained to me how when they get a cardiac patient, that they have this window of time. The goal is to get that patient in and that procedure conducted within that window of time is to minimize the risk and the damage to the heart.
Right. Which, thank goodness, all of that happened. And so after this, you obviously needed a little bit of time to recoup, I would think. But you were then back on your feet pretty soon after. And that's when you decided to leave your federal job and focus full time on entrepreneurship. So how did that go, that decision?
Well, I'm going to tell you, Doria, I did return to work soon, probably sooner than I should have. At the same time, I'm not one to really just, stop. I'm always in some type of movement. So I felt good and I felt that I needed to go ahead and get back into the groove of things rather than not. I needed to do it sooner rather than later. But I will tell you that right after I was released from the hospital, and I was home recovering, my emotions were kind of all over the place. It set in that, okay, you had a heart attack, and that's serious. And I remember having these feelings of just being overwhelmed in emotions, almost like some sort of depression that was trying to set in. And I specifically remember saying, no, I'm not going to go down this road. I'm not going to go down this road. God pulled me through this. So I'm just going to get up and keep it moving. I'm grateful to God that I made it through this because it could have been the other way around. And it was a serious thing, as you said. It wasn't, just something to be taken lightly. It was major. It really was. I decided that I wasn't going to waddle in my emotions of woe is me. But what I did, I really rethought life because that day, that emergency, everything happened so fast. It happened so fast. And I thought about that. I said, my life could have been over with, like really over. And my children could have been planning a funeral. And I said, well, considering that and just really thinking about that, it's like the passion that was already brewing in me for entrepreneurship and just following my own vision just really came to the forefront. I'm thinking at this point, okay, Deborah, your life is so precious and life period is so precious and valuable that whatever you're going to do in life, whatever you desire to do in life, do it.
Just do it.
Just do it. Don't overthink it. Think about it, plan as much as you can, but don't overthink it or don't overplan. Just do it. That's when I started to think that, okay, well, I've worked already 30 years for the federal government. Both of my children are grown, and I want to be a full time entrepreneur because I have a vision. I want to help people. I want to help people pursue their purpose, their vision, maximize their potential. I just want to inspire people. I want to empower people to be their best, help pull out the best in others. That's what I want to do full time. I want to grow my business and do this. This is what I want to do every day. I don't want to be locked down on a 9 to 5 where I have to ask, can I take leave? I have this medical appointment. Can I take 2 hours to attend this medical appointment? Or I have to hit the clock per se or punch the clock at 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning, and I have to be there at 4:30 in the evening, and I'm commuting every day. I don't want that to be my life anymore because on April 16th, I had an emergency that basically could have gone in a different direction. It didn't by the grace of God. So now I have another opportunity. I looked at it as another opportunity to do the things that I really want to do in life, to start a new chapter in life. I thought about it and I made a conscious decision in April, because I made the decision in April that I was going to pivot and go in a totally different direction. It was a scary decision because, of course, I worked for the federal government basically all of my life. At that point, that's all I knew. I'm a federal employee. I've been a federal employee for 30 years. I'm getting a federal employee check every 2 weeks. So now here I am going to step out on my own and basically trust God, trust God to order my steps. And that's what I did. But it was scary. It was a big decision. It was scary. I didn't have, a lot of money saved. I had 1 year of salary saved, but I had all these ideas and things I had written on paper and stuff like that for years. And I figured, okay, I'm going to implement this program and I'm going to implement this program. And I will tell you that that didn't go the way I planned it per se, but the way that it went has been sufficient.
You had a vision and you had it planned out a certain way, and that's how you plan to execute it. And then it obviously iterated because there was some sort of different need in some way, right?
Yes, but the way that it went, it has been working. I started to do the leadership training and development coaching. That came about, it was an opportunity that I didn't even look for per se. It
Found
came
you.
to me,
Yeah.
it found me. And I was like, okay, God, I see what you're doing. This is the direction I need to go in. So I ended up signing on with entering into an agreement with a lady to do this type of coaching work. So that's how the executive coaching came about. But I would tell you that my federal career had prepared me for that because in my last role as an LR specialist, that's what I did. I advised managers daily on performance matters, conduct matters, and things of that nature. It kind of went along the same lines of what I had done for the federal government.
Absolutely. It makes so much sense. And so the opportunity found you, And did you have to do any marketing at all, or has it just been all based on people that you knew previously, or just things coming your way?
Well, I did some marketing. I did. Not a lot, but I kind of just updated my LinkedIn profile. And this was prior to the opportunity. I'd already updated my LinkedIn profile, and I am a certified professional coach. And I'd got my certification actually back in 2012 when I was still working for the federal government, because that's something that I wanted to do. And I wanted to have the credentials to do it as well. So I completed that certification in 2012. I updated my LinkedIn profile because, of course, I was no longer a federal employee. So I wanted to go more in detail about my knowledge, skills, and abilities, what I had done, and what I know that I could do or can do, listing all my credentials and things of that nature. When the opportunity found me, I didn't necessarily have to get ready per se, do a whole lot to get ready to do that executive coaching work, because over the years I had been researching, taking training, and looking into doing that anyways. I shared with a couple of people how I had looked into an actual executive coaching program with the University of Georgia, probably back in 2000, the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, and then to have it actually manifest in 2021, that was just powerful. It really was. I actually looked into it already, but it did find me. So I was able to just really transition over into doing that work, being that I'm ex military. The executive coaching is mainly with military executives. So we have that in common. I can identify with them because I'm ex military.
Is it a federal contract that you have, or?
It is a federal contract, and I'm basically a subcontractor under a subcontractor.
That's wonderful. I wanted to just go back to a few things I just want to very briefly touch on, because I know we're short on time. You married and divorced twice. Many people do. I also have my story. In hindsight, how did your marriages help or hinder you?
I'm going to say that, and I will say this of both of my marriages. A lot of times when people get divorced, there's that, I guess, negative, just that,
Acrimony.
yeah.
Yeah.
That wasn't my case per se. That's not my case. Of course, we were not on good terms, but I reached this place within myself, especially with the first marriage. I was expecting something from my ex husband that he couldn't give me per se. I went into the marriage with the mindset of, this is how I am, this is how I was raised, these are my morals, these are my values, and his were different. But it's like I wanted to force who I was, my morals, my values, and all of this on him when he was a totally different person. He's his own individual. And it took me 10 years. I was married in the first marriage, 10 years. It took me 10 years to get to the point where I realized that I was wrong to even expect that from him, to expect him to change, to be who I wanted him to be. And when I reached that point, when I could reach that conclusion, then I was able to accept that we were just totally two different people that had different outlooks on life, different upbringing, and they just didn't mesh. They just didn't gel. And I felt it was unfair for me to ask him to be somebody that he wasn't. And if you really love somebody, you let them be who they are. You let them be who they are. And that's even if you're not together.
Absolutely. And you also remind me that, I think this happens as people mature, is that, in my earlier relationships, I had that same sort of expectation that someone was going to fill certain, if you want to call it an emptiness or whatever, inside of me. And I had to come to terms with the fact that no, actually, I'm in control of me and I'm really responsible for what I do and my choices. And so it's interesting to hear you say that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened. So with that first marriage, I actually initiated the divorce. because I've really sat down and thought, well, how much more of my time, my life, am I willing to invest just on hope that he will eventually be this person. But like you said, I'm my own answer in that regard. He couldn't fill that void for me. That was something that I had to do myself. So I initiated the divorce in the first marriage. Now, the second marriage, I kind of jumped into a second marriage kind of quick because the first marriage dissolved in 1999, and the second marriage took place in 2001, I believe it was. But that one was very short lived because I would say at that point my patience wasn't as such. You know,
Yes.
it wasn't as such. So that one dissolved rather quickly because of just some extramarital affairs on his part. And I just knew that that was something that I didn't want. That's a deal breaker. So that dissolved within 2 years. And here I am after that dissolving marriage with two children, young children to raise. My daughter was 8, and I think my son was 3 at the time, 8 and 2 or 3.
So you were a single mom.
Right, single mom, working full time, shift work, going to school full time, striving to be the productive individual that I know I am.
Well, and it's interesting that you talked about how you have some guilt about not having showed up for your children. But when I hear your story, you've done so much. And you also touched upon the fact that you wanted to do as much as you could with your life because you wanted to provide for them the future that you had to work really hard to get yourself.
Yes, because I have a African American male son, and the literature already talks about the strikes that are against the young African American male and the statistics that are out there about single parenting households and things of that nature. And I just decided that's not my portion, that's not my story. So I'm going to do whatever I can within my power to make sure that I can put my children in the best school, that will be in the best neighborhoods where we don't have to worry about bullying and things of that nature. So that's what I did. That's why I worked so hard, and that's why I was so determined, whatever it takes for my son and my daughter to go to school and they don't have to think about survival of the fittest. I moved around. I know that from 2012 up until 2015, I probably moved 3 or 4 times just to ensure that my son was in the best school. He went to private school for maybe 3 or 4 years, and that was a chunk. Here I am a single parent, but God made it possible for me to do that. And I'm so grateful that I was able to do that because I think about the single parents that couldn't and that can't, and their children have to be exposed to environments that are counterproductive to their life. And that's not my story. So I'm so grateful for that. But yeah, that's why I worked so hard.
Oh, yes, and you did. And so my question would be to you today for women who are listening to this who are single mothers. If you had a message or some tips to give them, what would they be?
I would say remain hopeful, keep hope alive, as they would say, and use available resources that are out there, free resources. We're now in this age of information, I would say. There's so much information out there, and it's free information. Even though I'm an advocate for education, of course, with a PhD, you don't necessarily have to have a degree to be successful. And especially in this day and time with all of this free information out here, really now, truthfully, and I'm going to say it out of my mouth, even with the PhD, colleges and universities and things of that nature is really a money making business now because there's so many people getting out of school with all this debt. But I would say use the resources that are available and network with people that can help you, people that can help you, point you in the direction that you need to go in. Don't stop, just press. No matter what comes or goes, just press. Even if you have to motivate yourself, make sure that you continually motivate yourself, be around others that can motivate and empower and inspire you. And of course, first and foremost, develop a relationship, an intimate relationship with God, because it is my faith. It is my faith that has kept me going. And I just didn't, wake up and start this faith thing as an adult. It started when I was a little girl, actually. You got to have that faith and hope and belief in God, and just to give it your all, because this is our only life. This is it. This is our opportunity to give back to God what He has invested in
In
us.
us. That is so true. And I wanted to briefly just kind of end on your faith. You're an ordained minister. Faith has played a huge role in your life. What is the biggest win in your life? And do you have a regret? And if so, what?
And I don't want to sound corny, but truthfully, Doria, my biggest win is my belief in God. I just believe that because I believe in God as my source, as my guide, that I am able to endure whatever comes in life. And that's what keeps me going. It really is, because life is life. Life is hard. Life is challenging. Life is ups and it's downs. But because I believe in God, I'm able to basically coach myself through the ups and downs, well, the downs especially. I'm able to coach myself through it just by believing in the written word in the Bible.
And it seems to me that the community also around the church that one has is also incredibly supportive and helpful.
That is so true, because the church that I'm a member at, we're a small church, but we're like a family. So I know that, like, on that day back in April of 2021, when I was having that medical emergency, I was able to call my pastors, and they were there to pray with me through that ordeal that I was experiencing at that time. So definitely that plays a great part in being able to just endure and go through life, just navigate life in general.
Absolutely. It's like your North Star.
And if I had a regret, I would have to go back to that time. As I said, I feel like I miss my children's experiences. There are just times I don't even remember. I can't reflect on them because I was just so tired from working so many hours. But I guess it balances out in the end, as you said, because I was able to provide for them.
Exactly. It was the trade-off, I think, right?
Right.
And not that it makes
Yeah.
it any easier, but at least it puts it in perspective because I can tell that you're very proud of them today.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, I am. My children, they are both just the joy of my life. They really are. And they are really good children, good young adults. And to say that as a single, divorced, single parent is definitely a plus in this day and time. I've never had to worry about where my children were or where they are, because they are good children, and they are always in good hands, of course, because they are believers in God too. My son, that's all he knows, church. He's raised in the church. He doesn't know anything else. My daughter, the same. So I'm just so grateful for that.
That's touching to me. I wasn't doing religion for whatever reason. I wasn't raised with it really. I was baptized. And then, like, until I was 40, I'm 52, I did not embrace God at all. And then I became confirmed in my 50s because I found that I needed faith. And it has really shaped my life. But my biggest regret is that I did not expose my children to religion. And I know that people always say, well, but they can find it themselves. Yes, they can, but it sure would have helped. And that is a regret of mine. If I had at least given them a foundation that they could either accept or not accept. But right now, they don't even really know what it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
This has been so wonderful. And can you tell listeners where they can find out more about your company and about you?
Well, if you're looking for me, you can find me on my website at Encore. That's ENCORE, Encore Empowerment International.com. On social media, that being Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, you can find me at Dr. Debra Wright Owens. And the reason, I'll just add, the reason I use Wright is because it's my maiden name. And as I told you, my grandfather, such a strong role model and figure in my life, I just have to highlight my maiden name, even though legally it's Debra Owens. But I'm on all social media platforms, Dr. Debra Wright Owens.
Dr. Owens, thank you so much for coming on She Ventures today and sharing your life with us.
Thank you, Miss Doria. I'm so happy that you invited me. You extended this opportunity to me, and I'm grateful. Grateful I had the opportunity to share my story.
You've been listening to She Ventures. Like what you heard? You can find us wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss a show.